You see, today, it's going to be epic. I'm going to try that. You say it. When I say it's going to be, you say, it's going to be, it's going to be. Be epic right now. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go greet somebody, would you? I'm laughing. I told Tracy as I'm driving in this morning, I said, it's going to be epic. She says, what's going to make it epic? I said, I'm going to talk to people about God. Epic. See, what I would like for us to do is to... I want us to think a little bit about what we've covered so far, okay? And there are a lot of different ways of interpreting the book of Revelation, and I've tried to address the fact that those different ways have a tendency to divide us as the body of Christ and do things to pull us down and tear us down and cause us to fight each other rather than build one another up. And what I do know for sure is that God's Word is living and active. What I do know for sure is that it's inspired by God. What I do know for sure is that it is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. What I do know for sure is that it is supposed to be used by us to build us up into Christ, who is the head of the church, not to tear us down. And so people have been waiting as I've been teaching over the last few weeks. Which position, Pete, are you going to take on this particular piece of theology, and which position are you going to take on this piece of theology? And I've had varying levels of feedback, sometimes frustration, sometimes joy, because they're having a hard time pinning me down. Okay. And that's on purpose. You see, it's not about digging in and fighting each other. It's about using God's Word to build one another up. Okay? What I'd like to do today is I want to introduce something to you that maybe you have not heard of, especially if you are kind of a what I'll call a Revelation junkie. If you like studying the book of Revelation and you like the different interpretations and getting into, this is one that you may not have heard, that you may not have looked at. It tends to be something that is kind of anyway. So you might not have heard this. Okay. I want you to think about the first part of the book of Revelation, the first week that we spent together, and what it was that John wrote about in there. He wrote to the 7 churches in Asia Minor. These are not the only 7 churches that exist. We cannot trace back every church in God's church to these 7 churches. That's not the significance. There's something about the number 7 that God seems to love. It's this sort of number of maybe completion. Creation was done in 6 days. On the 7th day, God rested. We have 6 days of work. On the 7th day, we rest from our work and we focus on God. There is something sort of significant with that 7-day week kind of thing. But what I want you to see is that there are 7 churches in that first lesson, that first week that we spent together. I want you to think about the book of Revelation kind of like flying in an airplane. Now, if you've never flown in an airplane, this is going to be a little bit, you're just going to have to, I'll ask you to imagine it, okay? Imagine life differently. This is what we do. Now, as you get into the airplane, whether you like flying or don't like flying, you get in there, you strap in, you sit, you wait, at least when it's a commercial airline, until everybody's in and we got all of our baggage in there and so forth, and then we back out and we taxi and we start down the runway and it's rumbling and you can tell when you take liftoff because it goes going on rumble, 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 okay, and it kind of and the wheels, you can feel the wheels leave the ground. Now, if you look out the window when the wheels leave the ground, you can still see buildings, you can still see people at what is ground level. People look like people, okay? Buildings look like buildings as you are going down that runway. You can still see the blades of grass if there is a field there, or if there is a cornfield. You can see the corn in the cornfield, okay, as you're going on down and you take off. In the book of Revelation, the equivalent of that is the section on the 7 churches, okay? God is speaking specifically to people right where they are, in their home, in their church, looking at things the way they look at things every day. They are living through persecution. They are under Roman rule. It is not a good Roman rule. They are most probably living under the Emperor Domitian at this point, which means they've been through a bunch of Roman emperors at this point in the game, and a whole bunch of chaos in the Roman government, and some of it has really rained down on Christians in a bad way, especially when you got to the Emperor Nero, who was the 5th emperor in the line. He's one that, I told you last week, he would do things like take Christians and tie them up on a pole and set them on fire as tiki torches for his backyard, okay? And so it is not fun being in that scenario. Now God speaks to them right where they are and says, I know where you are. I know what you are going through. Hang on for a little while longer. Continue to be faithful. Hey, by the way, you're starting to stray. Come on back in this area or this area or this area, depending on the church. He was very specific to the church, and he gave them very specific feedback as well as very specific ways of holding on, and then says, when you overcome, you will have all the benefits and the blessings of having your name in the book of life. Okay? And he gives different ones to the different 7 churches. That's ground level. Now, you're on your airplane and you start to take off. You get a little bit higher, and what happens is people start to shrink down. I mean, you can see them. They're like mini people. It's kind of, weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. They kind of look like little weebles. They look like maybe those little army men or whatever. They just look like, you can see them, but the details are not as good. You're starting to get a building start to look short, right? Because you're getting above, and you have a different perspective. Now, the second week, what we did is we came back and we covered a bunch of scriptures that talked about 7 seals. And what I want you to see about the 7 seals is a couple of things. First of all, you definitely have a sense that the airplane is a little bit higher now, okay? Down here, we were at this level, and we looked way up here, and Jesus, we could see, kind of like watching through a window way up in the clouds. It was approaching the Ancient of Days. He was there, the Lamb that was slain, and He speaks to us way down here. Now, when we get here, what happens is that we start seeing events a little more spiritual, almost like we're getting closer to the heavens. Okay? So Jesus, we see, and He approaches up here, and we kind of watch all that from down here. We're still down below and watching up here. But we get to the 7 seals, and He breaks a seal, and a horse with a rider comes out. And so, I know horses from down on earth level. And I know riders from down on earth level, but these are horses that are colored, sometimes colors that you don't normally see horses colored as. These are riders that are coming out, and they're doing something that is a little bit more epic, okay? So a rider comes out, and all of a sudden, it's giving power to all conquerors, people who want to go out and conquer the world, okay? And now we're seeing the power of these conquerors coming from this first rider on this first horse. Now we see the next rider comes out, and he gives the sword to people so that they are slaying one another. All of a sudden, we are starting to kill each other and murder each other. So at the first level, we would see murder like Cain and Abel, okay? The story of Cain and Abel. And so he says, come on, brother, let's go on out to the field, and he ends up killing him. Out here, at this level, what we're seeing is a rider comes out on a horse with a sword, and all of the Cain-type people suddenly have this urge and the power to go and start killing people, okay? And so murder starts happening across the land. We're a little bit higher, okay? And so what we see there is a change in altitude as we're looking at it. All right, stick with me. I know this is a little bit different than what you were expecting probably on the book of Revelation. We also see that the first 4 seals end up with horses that come out, and these bad things start happening. The 5th seal breaks, and we look up into heaven, and we see the saints that are there in the presence of God, and they're saying, how much longer does this need to go on as they're watching this stuff down here? And he says, a little while longer, and he gives them a white robe and says, be patient. And then we see the 6th seal is busted, and Jesus, they're getting ready for Jesus to return, and the sky comes back, and stars start falling down from the sky, and Jesus is getting ready to return, and we get 144,000 from a Jewish background that are Christians, and we have, it's most probably a symbolic number, so it's 12 12s, and you've got the non-Jewish background people from all the nations who are all marked with the seal of the Lamb. Okay, and then we get to the 7th seal, and it's a time of quiet and worship. 7 days we work, 6 days we work, on the 7th day we rest, and we worship. Okay? Now, as the plane continues to go on up, what happens is that people start to become really, really small, if noticeable at all. Buildings start to look like, something on my Monopoly set, okay? You start to see fields of corn as squares. Have you ever flown in an airplane and seen that, right? You're flying over all these fields, and it just looks like these little patchwork quilt squares that you're looking at, and you're thinking, that's 100 acres right there, that little dinky square, okay? Because you know the territory, and so you're going, how in the world? So you're seeing it all differently. Now, you can see the clouds real clearly at this point, right? You can see those up close and personal. You can see all kinds of detail there. You start to see the sun and the moon and the horizon differently as you get to that level. And last week, we went to 7 trumpets. And suddenly, we're seeing these events through a different lens. Now, once again, I want you to notice that there's 4 and then the 3, okay? So the first 4 trumpets set off these epic things, but now I'm not looking at it through the eyes of the church that I go to or ground level. I'm not looking at these things through the eyes of sort of a horse coming out and all of a sudden stuff is happening. Now it is much more cosmic in nature, okay? If you look at the 4 things when the first 4 trumpets blow, these 4 things are like falling out of the sky. It's like meteorites coming down. It's something from way out there is coming down here, crashes into the earth, and destroys 1/3 of the earth. Something out here comes down here, crashes into the water, and destroys 1/2 of the sea. Something down here comes down here, crashes into fresh water. It turns bitter, and we've got the wormwood thing. Something out here comes. This is what, and then the fourth one is we see the sun, the stars, and the moon. We lose a third of them. Okay, so something's crashing into them. Okay, we've got this sort of big. You get a sense that it's big, it's epic, and you can see how it's affecting things down on earth, but it's like you're looking at the patchwork quilt because you're that high in the airplane now. All right. We get to the fifth trumpet, the sixth trumpet, and the seventh trumpet, and they are different. We don't have those big four things. The fifth one, now all of a sudden, instead of looking up and seeing the saints up here, with the fifth one, we're looking down and we're seeing everybody being tortured except for the saints down there. And so it's like we looked down from the airplane instead of looking up from the airplane. And then we see on the sixth one, a third of the people die. A third of those who are not sealed with the Lamb. So we're tied back to this story here. And we get to the seventh one, and once again, worship breaks out. Okay? Now, today, we get to move up one more level. And we're not even going to do sevens. We're just going to look at it from a heavenly perspective. We are way above the clouds. We're at the point where we took a space shuttle and went out into outer space. Okay? Really, if you think of it another way, we're going from sort of a three-dimensional world to that fourth dimension where the spiritual world is existing. And at the seven churches, we're standing firmly in ours, and we get little windows into the spiritual realm. Now, when we're here, we're looking at the spiritual realm. Everything. We're seeing this fourth dimension that we can't see unless we're given the opportunity to see, because God pulls back the curtain and gives us the revelation. And so in the book of Revelation, God has pulled back the curtain and gives us the revelation. What you'll notice as we're going through this is that the sense of time gets totally lost. We were starting to lose the sense of time in the other three levels. But in this level, the sense of time is totally messed up. What's going to happen is events that we think of as sequential get thrown into the picture in a non-sequential way. They are out of order. And it is, I think, God's way of letting us know, again, stop asking the question when, start asking the question what, as we are reading and listening to this. Now I'm going to back up, okay? We have a great and wondrous sign appearing in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, a crown of 12 stars on her head. First question we end up asking is, does this woman represent a woman? Are we talking about a person, a real person, or is this just some sort of an image of some sort? Okay? Now, we could very easily say this is a woman that it represents Eve, the mother of all people. And there are things in the passage that might make us think that. We could say that this woman represents Mary, the one who gives birth to Jesus. And there are things in the passage that might represent that. We could say that the woman is, an archetype of Israel, talking about the Israelites in Israel giving birth to the Savior, because there are things in the passage like her feet, a crown of 12 stars. Okay? So maybe this woman is representing Israel. Okay? So what happens is we have a harder time pinning it down when we get to this level in the book of Revelation. And I think that's on purpose. What God is trying to do is communicate something to us, and what we need to do is keep our eyes open to what is it that God is trying to communicate to us. She's pregnant. She cries out in pain. She's about to give birth. Then we have an enormous red dragon, 7 heads, 10 horns. We're going to come back to the 7 and the 10 and so forth. 7 crowns on his head. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman. We have this epic story. She's about to give birth. Now what's going to happen? And so she gives birth, and her child is snatched up to God and to his throne. Okay? Now, the woman fled into the desert to a place prepared by God where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. What we know that we have in this passage is a woman, a dragon, and a child. That's all we know at this point. We don't know who the woman is. We don't know who the dragon is. We don't know who the child is. Although you're probably thinking the same thing I'm thinking, born, then snatched up and seated at the throne of God. That's probably talking about Jesus. At least that's what I'm thinking. Okay, this calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. His number is 666. What we find is now a second beast that comes into the picture. What I want to do is share with you just a couple of pieces of information. Domitian is now reigning. He reigned from 81 to 96 AD. Domitian would refer to himself in writings as Caesar, which is the title. That's like for us, President of the United States, Caesar was the title. But he would also refer to himself in his writings as Master and God. You see, what was starting to happen was that there was a Roman emperor sort of cult, a religious cult, a belief system where that the emperor was in fact a god. And that started to kind of die down especially after, it was starting to die down with Nero a little bit. Well, Nero tried to do it, but Nero was a bit nuts, and so people didn't go for it as much. And it died down after him, and Domitian brought it back. And so people were being told to worship Domitian as a god. Domitian reinstated a fire god, the Vulcan, a fire god's altar, a second altar to him. So there was this focus on fire. And so now we've got fire coming down from heaven as we're talking about this. And we have the mark of the beast. People can't sell or trade unless they have the mark of the beast. Have you ever looked at your $1 bill? What's on the $1 bill? In God we trust, okay? That's the part that you choose to look at. That's good. I like that. Whose picture is on there? On the front? George Washington, okay? And our government's seat of power is in Washington, right? And so it is a reminder to us of the whole governmental system that we have. You know who was on the trading coin in the days of, well, the book of John and the book of Revelation? Caesar. Okay. I'm just doing this for fun. Because it's a whiteboard. And sometimes it's just fun to, suppose and think about stuff, possibilities. If you said their name, we say president and then the name of the president. What they would do is say the name and then say the title afterwards. So it was, Augustus Caesar or Nero Caesar. Okay? You can say it either way. You can do it either way. Caesar Augustus, Caesar Nero. And in the Greek, it would be Neron Kaiser. Kaisar. For you Greek students, you can check me on that, make sure that that's right. Okay, Neron Kaisar would be the way they would say it in Greek, which was the language of the day. And you're like, why do we care about that, Pete? Well, stick with me. If we transliterate that into Hebrew, what does transliterate mean? Anybody? What's the difference between translate and transliterate? Man, my Wednesday night people don't let me down. What's the difference between translate and transliterate? Transliterate, huh? Yes, right. So you're making it sound like so translate takes the meaning and moves it over from the old language to the new language. Transliterate, you can mispronounce it and say transliterate. You take the letters and move them over from one language to the other. Okay. Now in Hebrew, this is kind of hard because in Hebrew you got to do this backwards. So Neron would go Neron and Kaisar would be like so, and the S actually looks pretty similar, because in Hebrew you go from right to left. So Neron Kaisar. You're like, well, Pete, why do I care about that? Well, okay. In Hebrew originally, there was no numeric system, okay? If you wanted to say first, second, or third, they had a Hebrew word for first, second, or third. If you said 1, 2, or 3, there was a Hebrew word for 1, a Hebrew word for 2, Hebrew word for 3. But there really wasn't a numeric system like we have now, where we have, the 0 through 9 kind of a thing, and then we can, do a 10-base decimal system. Now I'm getting into geek mode. But the bottom line is they didn't have that. The Greeks adopted something where they used letters and made them represent numbers, and the Israelites picked up on that, and they started using letters to represent numbers. And so by the time that this was written, actually it started a couple hundred years prior to this, each of these Hebrew letters had a numeric value to it. In other words, if they were doing math, these would represent numbers so that they could do math. Why are you telling me about that, Pete? Well, I'm going to put the numbers up here. So we got 50, and we got 200, and we have 6, and we have 50, and we have 100, and we have, you see where this is going? 60, and you have 200. Add those up. To a first century Christian, the beast isn't just Nero. It is the Roman Empire, the Roman emperors that are forcing them to worship Roman emperors, forcing them to trade using the mark of the beast, Caesar. Okay? Now, is that the only meaning of 666? Of course not. We know that. There's lots of people that are having all kinds of discussions about, whether it is Muhammad or whether it's this particular religious leader or whether it's this particular political leader even in our day. And I got to tell you that I love that God wrote the book of Revelation the way God wrote the book of Revelation, because to me, the real power of the book of Revelation is that we can end up seeing this played out in our day, no matter what day or age it is. 666 could be talking about Adolf Hitler in the days of World War II, or Mussolini, Stalin. It could be talking about different religious leaders, maybe a David Koresh, something like that, that we end up thinking about that is rising in power and demanding people to pay homage to him or her. As we look at the things that are happening even now in our day and age, we have things that vie for not just our attention, but our allegiance, and beyond allegiance, our worship. And only God gets our worship.